Good evening. Some of you may remember that last December we had a very interesting talk from Matthew Simmons from Canal River Trust about managing boats on London's busy waterways. This was part of an engagement process with various stakeholders, looking at the issues that boaters experience and others experience on our waterways. The plan for that is to lead on to a consultation session, which is not at this point ready. An awful lot has been happening in the last year, and Canal and River Trust have been busy with many other things, but I'm very pleased to say that Ros Daniels, who is the London and South East Director, and Matthew Simmons, our National Boating Manager, have kindly said they'll speak to us tonight. The topic is capital assets, and it's about the Canal and River Trust's London waterways. And they're going to be talking about managing and maintaining the waterways for the benefit of all users, boaters, and everybody else. We're going to hear about updates on the ongoing maintenance and repairs programme and what the Trust is doing to support boaters and deliver them the London mooring strategy and try and manage this growth in boat numbers. So now we have a fairly good percentage of who we're expecting. I think we should carry on, and just a reminder, the Q&A button for any questions, not the chat button. And I'm delighted now I think Ros is going to speak now, but to introduce you to Ros Daniels and Matthew Simmons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Are these slides ready to go?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. It's a really lovely. Thanks, Matthew. Next slide, please. It's really lovely to be with you this evening. Matthew and I are going to be doing a bit of a double act for you. I'm just going to start off by talking about setting the scene for the London waterways and some of our thoughts and ambitions for next year. And then Matthew will talk about some of the challenges as Libby's said, and the water safety zone, London mooring strategy, and then a bit of an update with the managing busy London. And then we'll have an opportunity for Matthew and myself to answer your questions and your thoughts. But next slide, please, Matthew. So it's been quite a busy year, as Libby was saying, for us on the waterways. Obviously, we started the year sort of going into lockdown, and our thoughts obviously remained with how we could keep our people safe, but also manage those essential tasks to make sure that the waterways in the London and South East and across the Trust, all 2,000 miles of it, remained open and accessible for the communities who are living on it and by it as much as possible. And so we worked throughout. Our teams were out on the water side, on the bank throughout the lockdown, doing those essential tasks. And the rest of us, myself included, we had to transition to home working. And so now we are in this new world of working not only at home but also getting out and about more. And I'm pleased to say, my team and I continue to sort of really see all the work really flourishing as we continue to get back to somewhat we hope is a bit more normal in the world. Also, our volunteering team have been absolutely crucial to us as ever during this last year. Obviously with COVID restrictions, again, our volunteering hours and the volunteering opportunities had to be restricted initially to keep everybody safe. But I'm really pleased to say, our numbers are growing and are flourishing again. And we're really looking to explore new ways of getting our volunteer teams, which are so vital for our work, engaged. They're helping us with more daily maintenance tasks. Our adoption groups are helping us with those regular preventative maintenance tasks, which are so crucial to making sure the waterways run smoothly through our busy seasons. And then we've been continuing to sort of promote and work with boaters and boating facilities and improvements where we can. And really, again, the eco-mooring zones in Islington have been a real innovation where we've been able to offer boaters, alternatives to traditional forms of powering and heating. And you can now have onshore power available. And we're again working with Camden, again a similar scheme. So, you know, something that we've been able to do in continue to contribute to the massive debate about climate change and the way that we will all have to adapt to these things going forward. So an innovative way, a pilot for us to explore some of the boundaries, some of the concerns, but also some of the opportunities projects like that offer us. Our education work has also continued throughout the last year. Our water safety assemblies, for instance, which are so critical to helping the younger generation stay safe when they're by water, have been, you know, initially online. So again, they adapted to this online world that we're in, but increasingly are now being able to get back into schools and offering our onboard water trips and sessions as well as more sort of student citizen science-based projects helping us with air quality and water quality projects, etc. You know, one thing that COVID did show that 1 in 6 people don't have access to a back garden, particularly in urban areas. So our waterways on and off the water for those communities proved absolutely vital, and we did see the usage of our towpaths and our waterways increased dramatically. That in itself brought problems, as we all know, about you know, the amount of people on the towpath, but it's really a huge opportunity for us to demonstrate the value that our waterways have to people's health and well-being. We know that equally people need to get healthier to support themselves, particularly with our own health as well, and our towpaths offer that real opportunity to do that. But as Libby said at the outset, we need to work out ways of managing that space for everybody. So our Stay Kind, Slow Down campaigns continue, about working with cyclists, even now e-scooters, about how we all share the space to make sure that we can continue to enjoy it. And that nature and heritage also continues as well. The bottom left-hand picture is our archaeologists, our heritage advisors down on the Hertford Union when we had the winter stoppage last January, sort of exploring some of the earlier you know, infrastructure that was on the canal. And indeed our ecologists even had to rescue some coots during the work as well. Our day's work for our team is never short, and indeed just this weekend our on-call team at the weekend were able to save a live deer that managed to get into one of our locks. I'm thankful to report that the deer sort of managed to be rescued and is all well. So again, our green flags are again another wonderful way that we get to celebrate all that our waterways has to offer, and we were awarded 6 green flags last year, and hopefully more plans to develop our areas across the London and South East region to really celebrate, as I say, everything that our waterways have to offer. So next slide please, Matthew. So next year our work will continue around some of those fundamentals, those things that are the bedrock of what we do, about making sure that our teams and public safety is at the forefront of our mind through our visitor risk assessments, about reviewing, you know, Maida Hill Tunnel I know has been a question this evening that we'll cover. All those things are very much on our minds and we're reviewing and assessing as we go on. I've mentioned our programmes of PPM, our planned preventative maintenance, that our teams constantly 365 days of the year are out on the waterways making sure that they're doing the checks, the services, to make sure that our waterways can be used for the ever increasing numbers of people who are enjoying them. We've also got 8 reservoirs in our region, and the reservoir team work with us about making sure that we are compliant with the government legislation that manages those, and again there's lots of work around vegetation and works that keeps those safe. And the never-ending tasks of our vegetation, our waste and our aquatic weed. You know, climate change again is affecting the amount of growth and the amount of money we have to spend annually on things like aquatic weed, whether it be the duckweed or indeed pennywort, which is becoming more and more of an issue for the region. But sadly, we also have to contend with, you know, what humans and other people do as well. For instance, in Brent Reservoir, we have just in the last few weeks had to clear nearly 1,500 tyres, fly-tip tyres from Brent Reservoir, a triple SI site. You know, we'd much rather be able to spend our money on the, you know, boating customer service facilities or indeed nature recovery, but instead we have to spend far too much of our money on clearing up other people's waste, sadly. And then the Winter Works programmes continues with our colleagues across the Trust, our reactive teams and our direct service, our construction teams, about making sure we're doing those lock gate replacements. For instance, I was out last week at Denham Deep Lock, just seeing some of the lock gates being winched in and craned in rather to be replaced. So a great opportunity for me to get out and see some of the work that the team do. We've also been doing and will continue to do a lot of work on our customer service inquiries and improving the response times that we give to you. You know, we've had to restructure the team. We've now also got a new customer management system, a CRM system, that will enable us to track inquiries and be able to respond in a much more timely manner to the inquiries and the volume of inquiries that we get going forward. Next slide, please, Matthew. And finally, you know, I've talked about the wellbeing agenda as well. We know that our waterways can offer so much to so many different groups, whether you're a boater, liveaboard, a continuous cruiser, and you know, or just out for day trips. And so we'll be continuing to focus our effort around 3 main programmes next year: beauty on the doorstep, making sure that we're doing the basics really well, that we're growing those green flags. Matthew will talk about our work around the London mooring strategy and our water safety zone. But we're also going to be offering some boater surgeries next year, local drop-in sessions where anybody can come along and ask their queries, and we can try and help and point people in the right direction. And we'll be also continue our work around active travel, you know, working through third-party funding. This is funding from developers or local councils to help improve the network, the towpaths that are so beneficial to, you know, whether you're living on a boat or indeed just enjoying walking along the towpath for your health. We've got our Wellbeing on the Doorstep programme. This is all those wonderful activities that, you know, whether it be the Let's Fish, Let's Walk, Healthy Walks programmes, or all our festivals and events that really, you know, help promote and celebrate all that the waterways can offer. We've also going to continue our programme of cultural history and exploring our oral history and the long history in the Docklands, and, you know, the sad stories about how it was also involved in the slave trade. And we've also got our learning and skills work that continues, and we've got a brand new programme called our Youth Fellowship, where we've been joined by 6 young people to help come and give a fresh perspective on, you know, how we might look at some of the projects and initiatives that we do in the Canal and River Trust. So I look forward to working with them in the next year. And then finally, it's all about growing our supporters, really making sure that the world, you know, who doesn't know us as well, really can understand who and what we are as the Canal and River Trust, and that we're a good thing to support. So Matthew again will talk about our Act Now for Canals campaign, really making sure that we're promoting and publicising all that we do. And we'll continue to do that through our festivals and events programme and our work on the towpath about celebrating all that we offer and all that we can offer for people's daily lives. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Matthew now.
Thanks, Ros. Thanks for inviting us back again to speak to you. I know we've called this capital assets because I think it's really worth reiterating that the waterways in London are a fantastic asset, not just for the people who live there, but the people who visit London, and they haven't always been seen as that. But as I discussed last time when I spoke with many of you, there are quite a lot of challenges that the increased number of boats on our waterways bring. And I just wanted to touch, before we talk about how we're working to address that and the things we're looking to consult on, just remind ourselves the scale of those challenges. Now, I shared this slide before, and it just captures the annual boat count that we carry out in London. Now, we didn't carry one out last year due to COVID, this year. And so our next full one won't be till next March. So we don't know precisely what change there might have been over recent years, but for anyone who's visited London recently, you will still see lots of boats, and particularly boats that don't have permanent moorings, so the continuous cruisers. But just it's worth remembering that it wasn't always like that. So these figures capture the boat count from 2010. And if we look back to 2010, there were just 413 boats without a home mooring, continuous cruisers on the London waterway. And in our last boat count, that had risen to over 2,000, with 2,146 boats. And that's a massive increase, which of course brings some benefits, but also challenges for us when managing the waterways. And just to put that in the context nationally, continuous cruising boats, the ones without home moorings, now make up over 50% of the boats in London. And they actually nationally, continuous cruising boats only make up a fifth of all the boats on our network. And in London alone, the continuous cruising boats make up over a third of all of the continuous cruising boats on the entire network. But of course, they're mainly in just 5% of our 2,000 miles. So that inevitably is bringing some challenges on mooring space, on pressure on facilities. But as you will know, it also brings the waterways to life. So there are some good things, but also some challenges that we have to deal with. And in London, that growth has been most acute in East London, particularly around the Lee Navigation, the Hertford Union Limehouse Cut, partly driven by the fact that for boats that only stay on the river navigations, there is a discount by law, so it's only 60% of the full license fee. And then central London is the next busiest area we've seen most growth on the London waterways. But you don't need to see statistics to show that growth. There's just one sample here of Google Maps, and I could show you quite a few different Google Maps. This is on the Lee, near Daubney Green, between Marshgate Bridge and Daubney Green. And it's not as clear unless you're zooming in. So we've put some dots just to give you an indication. So in 2011, you can see very few dots on that map, and each dot represents a moored boat. But as we move through to 2016 and then finally to 2021, you can see the change very clearly, that we now have areas of the London waterway where you have pretty much continuous lines of moored boats. So it's a very visible change in some areas. So I just want to talk now about things in the London Mooring Strategy. And I'm start with the water safety zone, because I think that's been quite a topical subject. It was a recommendation in the London Mooring Strategy to set up these zones on parts of the Lee where we've seen this increased number of boats, but also increased numbers of other waterway activities like rowing, like canoeing and paddleboarding, as well as long-standing existing waterway use with established rowing clubs that have been there for over 100 years. And so in those areas where we've got such a lot of different uses, and there's also commercial craft using the waterways there too, there's been increased concerns raised about the issue of safety, the issue of conflict between different waterway users. So the London Mooring Strategy set out proposals for what were originally going water sports zones, but it's very much about safety, so that's why they are called water safety zones now. But when we published the details of these earlier this year, there was some concerns raised, particularly about loss of mooring space. And so I'm going to talk through how we've been working to address those concerns, but still with the intention of improving and addressing the concerns that have been raised around safety on these parts of the river. So we commissioned independent facilitators early this year to engage with the different stakeholders to listen to their issues and concerns and see where we could find agreement. And there were agreement between the different groups, the different powered and unpowered craft users. And the 5 key areas was about working together to create a less contested space where everyone felt safe, to very much enforce existing rules and regulations, and to consult and involve all users in how rules and regulations are applied, but also provide clear signage information about those rules and act with clarity and transparency at all times. So those were the kind of common agreement that we reached through that independent engagement. But they also led to a wider report which set out 9 key recommendations, and we've accepted all of those recommendations to move forward with the water safety zones. And we're working through those. The first one of those was around helping to explain the existing rules to boaters. We appreciate that with a lot of the boaters that have come onto the waterway recently, they may not be as familiar with the rules and understand what they need to do to ensure that the waterway is safe for everyone. So particularly around mooring, we've been working since October with our own staff and additional staff from district enforcement who have been helping carry out daily walks on these sections of the Lee, speaking with boaters, providing additional information, including our moorings obligation booklet and our boaters handbook, to just help educate, inform everybody about where it's safe to moor and where it isn't safe to moor. And we've also formed an independently facilitated Lee Navigation Forum who are working with us to work and look through all the other recommendations and suggestions that came out of that initial independent facilitation to help make the Lee safer for all the waterway users. And so that has had 2 meetings. We are publishing the notes from those meetings on our water safety webpage. And we're also looking at specific issues that are coming up, ranging from not just mooring, but vegetation management, dredging, safety on the towpath, and trying to work through those issues and concerns with those stakeholders. The education and communication campaign that we've been running with boaters is going to continue through to the new year, but from January, we will be starting to apply our improper mooring process where boats are moored in no mooring sections. We want boaters to moor safely and considerately, but where they don't, this process will be applied, which ultimately could impact on the ability to hold or renew a boat license. But as I say, what we really want to do is to help people understand where it's not safe to moor and hopefully moor where it is safe for everybody. So just moving on to some of the other things in the mooring strategy and give you an update on that. One of the key aims was to try where possible to increase mooring capacity. And we've been progressing that through looking at additional mooring rings on concrete banks where boats can't currently moor. This has taken quite a long time because we've had to commission surveys into bank stability to make sure that where we put these in, there isn't any issues, there isn't going to be any damage to the bank, or it isn't going to be unsafe. But we've now identified quite a few sites which will be going in over the next few months. So on the Grand Union, on the Regent's Canal, and on the Limehouse Cut. There are others that we are looking at as well. They will take a little bit longer. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, we are trying to maintain a balance. It's not about having moored boats everywhere, but it is about trying to find places maybe a little bit further away from those busy places where it could encourage boaters to spread out a little bit and maybe relieve a little bit of the pressure on the busiest places. But as I say, we will be putting mooring rings into these bank sites in the next few months. And so some should be installed by the end of this year, but the remaining will be put in early 2020. Ros has already mentioned the Islington pre-booked eco mooring, which was part of the London mooring strategy, and that's been live since September and is being well used. We're seeing lots of boaters booking to moor there. It is free to book. You have to set up an account and are charged for use of the shore-based power. But since the strategy, we've actually seen other sites coming on which we didn't envisage. So there's actually been more work done looking at additional shore-based power. So Ros mentioned Camden, which is another scheme near Camley Street, and that's under construction and hopefully should be completed by the end of this month or early next month. That's slightly different to Islington in that it doesn't require booking. It's a towpath site, so you can moor for up to 14 days and you can access the power. You will still need to set up an account, and the signage explains how that's done. But it's another example of where we're working with partners in the borough and the mayor's office to deliver additional facilities for London. We've also got charging points on our visitor mooring at Brentford, which are being reconnected and should be completed again later this month. And Westminster have been successful in securing some funding to do a feasibility study on, so there may be another scheme coming forward at Paddington, but that's initial feasibility work looking at that. And you can see more about these schemes on our website. It's likely over the next few years, given the interest in addressing air quality and reducing particularly particle matter, that we will see more schemes that try and reduce the use of generators and engines, particularly in built-up areas. So although I haven't got any firm details I can share with you now, there's further conversations going on across London, and I think we'd like to see more schemes coming on board along these lines. Installing additional facilities for boaters was a big part of the London mooring strategy, but as you can imagine, it's also the most costly part and the most time consuming in terms of the complexity of putting anything into a very congested and busy capital city. So we have made some small improvements already, which we shared with you before, but the biggest investment is likely to take place over the next 2 financial years. And so at the moment, we're focusing on service searches for these locations, which we identified as potential sites for new facilities. And that will lead into the feasibility stage before we have more firm plans. But that's an important part of establishing where we can connect up to existing infrastructure and where there might be barriers to putting these in. But these are the ones we're focusing on at the moment, and service searches are underway at these sites. One of them is at Steele Road in West London, and this one will not only provide boat facilities, but it will also improve the public realm and provide some community space. It's part of the wider Harlesden Canal Improvement Project, and there's been community engagement in developing the plans, and over the next few months you will start to see some more formal consultation before we, as a planning application, probably early in 2022, and hopefully new facilities starting to be installed next year as well. But as I say, there will be wider consultation on that. The mooring strategy also included things that aren't necessarily fixed facilities and services. So one of those issues that came up was the increased use of separator toilets, sometimes called composting toilets, by boaters. And although we don't have any absolutely accurate data on who uses these at the moment, it is a question we're starting to include in our next round of boater surveys. We were picking up quite a high number of boaters telling us informally that they were using or seeing other people using those. So a pilot scheme was included in the strategy, and that actually got underway earlier this year in the summer. It is being run independently, but we have been supporting the startup of that scheme, and it's initially focused on the Lee and the Hertford Union and the Regent's Canal. It is a subscription scheme where boaters actually pay for that waste to be collected, and it's taken off and anaerobically digested elsewhere. It's proving to be popular. It's small numbers at the moment, but the operator is looking to expand that across other parts of London, and we're working with them to hopefully find a new base where they can operate at a larger scale. They use a bicycle collection scheme to collect full caddies and replace them with empty ones and take that off to be treated. Circular Revolution is the organisation that's leading that and delivering this, and you can find out more on their website. Another independently run scheme that's delivered one of the London Mooring Strategy projects was a scheme to deal with waste oil and bilge waste collection. That's been established at Stonebridge and has proved to be working well. There's a phase 2 that will be rolled out, just waiting for their boat to be back in service after some service work, but it's aiming that will come on board next year, and again offering a much needed service for boaters in terms of dealing with that waste oil. And finally, in terms of other services being delivered independently, that we identified through the development strategy the need for a place where boaters can do DIY maintenance on their boats. And so this has been trialled at Stonebridge Boatyard. There is high demand for it, and that has not been without issues with people waiting to access this facility. But it has brought benefits in trying to reduce people doing this on the towpath, which is not necessarily very safe. It's not permitted, but unfortunately we do see this happening. So providing somewhere where this can be done has been a benefit, and hopefully that will be continuing as well. So those are just a few updates on the work we've been delivering as part of the London Mooring Strategy. But as I talked to you about when I spoke last year, although the mooring strategy is focused on trying to deliver an improved boater experience in London, it won't address the fundamental issue of very high numbers of boats. Hence, at the end of last year, we started to do some additional work looking at what else we could do to manage boats on the busy waterways in London. And the first part of that was talking to boaters and asking what they thought we should do. And the sort of things they told us were very much around putting limits on the boats in London, looking at possibly congestion charging options in the busy areas, having a more proactive management of mooring space, which in part would make it easier for boaters who wanted to visit London from outside of the capital to do so. And then, addressing the fundamentals of where people more inappropriately or more on facilities or lock landings, and addressing overstaying as well. And there were some comments about addressing concerns about increased numbers of wide beams on the London waterways. So we have been looking at all these suggestions and these thoughts that came out of that first stage. This is clearly just a snapshot of the views and a summary, but there was a lot more detail. And we also spent some time particularly researching some views from the liveaboard boaters as well to get their input. But there are limits to what we can do. So some of those things are more challenging. So in terms of overall limits on licensed boats, we cannot apply any limit providing people meet those conditions. So it's not as simple as saying X number of boats in London and that's all we'll allow. There's a constraint there that we can't do. And also a constraint that we can't limit certain types of boats, so wide beams, for example, providing they are following the terms and conditions, following their, the maximum craft dimensions. There's not a restriction we can put on those. And also, as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about the growth in boat numbers, we all have rivers and canals in the London waterways, and rivers have certain public rights of navigations and rules that do make it difficult to apply some things, for example, like a congestion charge in the way you could on a canal. So we've had to consider those things because any proposals we put forward, we're awful mindful that we don't want to end up just squeezing a balloon and causing a problem somewhere else. So all these constraints are things we've been working through and looking at in detail. And then finally, we have no powers to apply fines. We can apply certain charges, but it's not as simple as saying you're doing something wrong, we will fine you. Those are constraints that we have had to work through in terms of identifying what options we can do. So there are some things that we are going to be consulting on, hopefully starting next month. I'm very confident that we will start that consultation in December, but they're focused on areas that are more specific proposals around further pre-booked moorings on some short stay sites, and that could include some seasonal pre-booked mooring as well. We've listened to the views about how we could manage short stay mooring better, so we'll be looking and consulting on options of ways we could manage that more effectively, and hopefully people seeing us managing those spaces. And we're also considering the overstay charges. So as I say, we can't issue fines, but we can and do issue overstay charges for exceeding short stay mooring times. But we're going to consult around the level of that overstay charge and get a view on that before we make a proposal on that. And then clearly we're looking at banning any double moorings of wide beam boats on some waterways, just to make sure that it maintains a safe navigation. So we'll be asking for views on those things. So there are going to be some specific proposals that we'll consult on from next month through to the spring. So there'll be plenty of time for people to give their views. But we also want to ask some views about some in principle things. So not specific proposals we have, but some questions we want to ask about whether we should be looking at creating more permanent moorings in certain areas further away, further out from the busy parts of London. Now, at the moment, our policy is not really to support online mooring, permanent online mooring. So we haven't been doing any of that really in London. But obviously there are constraints on where you can create offline mooring. There's, although there are lots of big water spaces adjacent to our waterways, old quarries that have been filled in, when we looked at whether we could access those to create mooring spaces as part of the mooring strategy, the cost and logistics were insurmountable, unfortunately. So if there is a demand, which we know there was from the work we did developing the mooring strategy for more permanent mooring, we want to ask people's views on the principle of creating some more permanent moorings in those quieter parts further out. But as I say, it isn't specific proposals, it's really a sounding on what people's views are. And also we'll be asking people's views on the principle of how we fund better boating facilities, because the cost is high, the demand is great, and to make sure that is sustainable, it's not just about putting them in, but maintaining them to a standard that people expect. So we'll be asking some in principle views on that. So as I say, those are the headlines. I can't share the specifics, but you won't have to wait long. We're looking to start that consultation in December. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the London specifics, but I just wanted to touch on a few other parts of the work the Trust has been doing, some in London and the South East, and some wider issues that you might be of interest to you. So firstly, just want to talk a little about the bodyboard cameras that we've been rolling out. Unfortunately, the Trust staff do on rare occasions experience difficult situations doing their work on the towpath, and can be subject to unpleasant and sometimes aggressive behaviour from some people. And as many of you will know, earlier this year we had the tragic incident which resulted in the death of one of our colleagues, Clive Porter, on the towpath in Aylesbury. In London we have now rolled out our body-worn cameras for our licensed support teams on the towpath. Although we have been trialling them in some areas since 2019, they're now being used routinely in some situations. And we hope that will contribute to keeping staff and others safe on the towpath, and hopefully reduce tensions and contribute to a safer environment. We've also, across our network, been auditing our short stay moorings. So this is an ongoing piece of work to look at accessibility of them and to make that information available. So we now have on our website for each of our regions a section on our disabled boaters webpage where we've audited a site. You'll be able to see information about what the site is like in terms of accessibility. So for example, whether there's rings and bollards, the type of surface. You will also see photographs of those sites so that you can look ahead and see what the environment is and plan your journey if you have mobility or disabilities. It also gives additional information that might be useful, whether there's car parking, accessible toilets, what other facilities there are nearby that people could access if they have a disability or limited mobility. So as I say, this is a rolling piece of work that's ongoing. We are actively auditing more sites in London at the moment, and so over the next month or so you'll start to see more sites added to these. But we very much would welcome other people's help in doing this as well. So if people have visitor mooring short stay sites near them and they're able to help us, please get in touch and we can share with you the sort of information we're gathering to provide that information for people to plan their journeys. So as Ros alluded to, there is a huge amount of work at the moment underway in the Trust preparing the case for the government grant review. So we're looking what will happen beyond 2022 when the grant is up for renegotiation. The government grant makes up about a quarter of our income, so any loss or even a reduction in that amount of money will have an impact directly on how we can maintain the waterways. So it really is a very important piece of work that will have an impact on boaters and others using the waterway. So the work to convince the government to maintain the grant is extensive, even if perhaps the process isn't particularly as clear as you might think. We've obviously not done this before. We haven't been in this renegotiation position, but we are seeking to demonstrate how the work of the Trust is supporting the Treasury and the government goals, whether that's levelling up or improving well-being and addressing health inequalities, particularly in those more disadvantaged communities where our waterways touch. So we're providing a huge amount of evidence in terms of data and statistics, but also building a story to highlight just how much impact for good the waterways have on people's life. But we can't do this alone, so it's not just a case of us making the case to government. We are working to bring hearts and minds along and wider support from boaters and everyone who uses the waterways to secure ongoing support for them going forward. So in summary, it's a case of putting to the government what we've achieved in the 10 years since the Trust has been formed, and what we've been able to do with that more stable income support from the government grant, but also what we can deliver going forward. So whether that's helping to mitigate climate change, whether that's providing access to green and blue space in areas where there's little, or the levelling up agenda the government talks about. So we're very much making that case. The Trust has submitted some documents already on the 4th of October, and there's further work underway now to put forward the economic case of why this investment is actually a very good investment in terms of what it delivers across our 2,000 miles of waterways. So as part of the Winning Hearts and Minds, we've launched our campaign to act now for canals, and that'll be building over the next year with specific asks of boaters and others, whether that's getting involved in volunteering or participating in the things that we've had, like the Sense in Nature survey or the Rate This Scene campaign that's running at the moment. And these will all contribute to the case of why the waterways are hugely valuable and need ongoing support. And we've been recruiting some celebrity supporters such as Dr. Amir Khan, but most importantly, the support of boaters is going to be crucial. You're the people who know and love our waterways more than anyone, and boating will always be at the heart of what we do. But boaters alone can't sustain the costs of the waterways, and so we need to build wider support from all the people who use the waterways to secure this funding. Some of you may have recently seen a video message that Richard Parry has published to boaters, but I want to hopefully, providing the technology works, share just a snippet with you which captures that point about why it's not just important for the waterway is important for boaters, but for everybody, and why we need that. The two are intertwined. Let's see if this works.
Most of our expenditure is to support the 35,000 private boats and the hundreds of boating businesses to operate. But in truth, we all have to acknowledge that the waterway's main value to government and our greatest chance of securing an ongoing grant is in the benefits they bring to the nation as a whole. We have to form a mass movement that matters to millions of people, not just relevant to tens of thousands. And so it's not a case of either waterways for boating or tow paths for walkers and cyclists and anglers, etc. It has to be both. The two are inextricably linked. Boaters alone couldn't afford the cost of the network, and the network wouldn't and can't exist without boats. The role that the waterways play in providing an accessible and attractive on-the-doorstep space for millions of people is vital in connecting with government policy. This doesn't mean we're neglecting boating. Any agreement we reach with government will provide the funds necessary to secure the network's future and the longer-term future of boating on the inland waterways.
Well, that worked better than the last time I tried to share it, so that's good. You can see the full film on our website. It will be on our YouTube site already, and it will be on alongside our boater report as well. It's about 10 minutes long, but I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it already, have a look, because it sets out the context of both the work we're being able to achieve, the work that's happening over the winter, just starting now, and also the longer term challenges the Trust is facing. So it's a really interesting short film. As I said, it will be published alongside our boater report, which we published earlier this month. That sets out how we spend our money to support boating on the waterways. This is the 4th boaters report that we have published, and this year we're shining a particular spotlight on just a few of the hundreds of maintenance jobs we carry out day in, day out across our waterways to keep them open for navigation. So there's a spotlight on some examples from each of the regions of our waterways. You'll be pleased to know probably that that's my last slide, and we're going to take some questions from you and hopefully give you some answers. So I shall stop sharing and hand back to Libby, who I think is going to throw the questions at me and Ros to try and answer.
Thank you both of you very much for a very informative talk. We have had a number of questions coming through, and so keep them going. Questions, please, as I said at the beginning, in the Q&A section, and we will take them as they come through. But I'm going to start with one that came through in advance of the webinar, and that's about the issues of getting through Maida Hill Tunnel, whether it's it's mainly for the issues for non-powered craft, some of which are authorised to go through and others need to use the portage system. And the big issue seems to be that the portage system is not, firstly, not well signed, and secondly, there are sort of locked gates, and the route around at the moment is disproportionately long, I think is the best way of describing it. And I just wondered what the plans were. I think Ros I don't know whether Ros or Matthew would like to pick up on that one.
I think we'll probably do a double act, Libby, but yes, it's an issue we very much aware of. We get lots of feedback. Obviously, it's a complex one. Obviously, our business boating customers are concerned about the safety issues, about having unpowered craft going through the tunnel. Signage is one thing we are aware of, when we are looking at reviewing the signage, and hopefully improvements will be made imminently in the next couple of months to the signage, which will hopefully make it more obvious about what's required. And we are continually looking to review and see whether we can make improvements. The problem is that the portage is long, as you say, and actually there aren't many alternatives to make it any shorter, which is one of the biggest issues. But Matthew, I don't know whether you want to come and add anything. Yeah,
I know that from some of the conversations I've had, I'm aware that for the current signage is perhaps not well positioned and not necessarily as clear as it could be. So that's certainly an area we're looking at, as well as the route for people who are porting their craft. But it isn't easy. I think the diversion is longer than it was, partly because that's out of our control with an issue where that section has been closed for a more prolonged period, with something that's under the towpath. So it isn't easy to answer, but it is an area that we are reviewing at the moment. But I think it will be a tunnel where we're not looking to make it open access. It's a very busy part of the waterway, and I know we have concerns from some of the powered craft users there. So there is a particularly authorised group that can use it, and we'll be working to try and communicate clearly to other unpowered craft users what they have to do and the diversion.
Thank you. What's the situation with the path along by the Lisson Grove moorings? Because I think that's part of the issue.
Yes, so I can give an update on that. So we had the contractors out today looking at, for those who know the tunnel, there's plastic sheeting and things, which was part of the UKPN work when the tunnel was leaking. So that will be removed today. I think the contractors were there, certainly this week. They're there. So once that's done, that will be one of the obstacles. We're also, the towpath works and the mooring stability works by our waterside moorings colleagues have been completed as well. So it's now a process of reviewing the towpath, doing any towpath repairs, offside vegetation, working with some of the moorers down there, and then very soon, hopefully, that Lisson Grove towpath will be open again to the public.
Thank you. If those that have concerns about that had anything else they wanted to ask, please add it to the Q&A. But for the time being, we'll go on to another question, a question from Simon. He says, Bow, 3 Mills and other locks in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. Access to these seems to be getting very hard to organise, especially at weekends or out of hours. Are there any plans to improve the situation, e.g. by using volunteers to operate the locks?
So yeah, absolutely. We are always keen and eager to have more volunteer lock keepers. It's one of our roles, which is incredibly popular. But bit like the Thames lock, we're also trying to move the operation of those locks online to actually be able to help us manage the locking, the movement through the locks more. But yes, plans. We're always keen to increase access and the availability of people being able to do the Olympic Loop, for instance, and enjoy their part of the waterway. So something we're continually working on. But if you've got specifics, again, specific occasions or observations, more than happy to receive those via customer inquiries or via Libby.
Not totally unrelated and from the same person, how is the new online booking service working for transits from Brentford to Teddington? And can the website please be upgraded to accept bookings between Brentford and Limehouse?
So the team report that the Thames locking booking is working really, really well. It sort of automated the system. Some teething problems initially when it went in, but those have been ironed out from our customer service team who now manage that. The locking times, the tide times are all up to date. Again, I can't speak to the specifics of the updating. Matthew, I don't know if you can add anything.
So I think the short answer here is the Limehouse lock, I think, is managed by Aquavista, who manage the moorings there. So in theory, yes, it could be incorporated into the online system. We do have a similar arrangement where we've got an arrangement with Bridgewater Canal where our system is used to book passage onto that. So yes, it could be. We haven't got any plans at the moment, but I can certainly take that away and we can look at whether that's possible, because it is certainly easier to use the online system, and we're finding that people who use it's much quicker and you can manage it yourself rather than have to speak to somebody or go backwards and forwards. So I'll certainly take that away and look at it.
Okay, thank you very much. A different question from Ian. He says, boaters pay a licence to help offset costs. In what way is the trust obtaining money from non-boaters?
So that's a good question. Well, you can say that boaters do pay a valuable contribution. About 10% of our income comes through the license fees, but the other 90% we get from elsewhere, which does include things like the government grant, which obviously comes from taxation. So everyone contributes to that. We get other charitable donations and a range of other investments and income streams. So our aim is to obviously clearly grow income. And so we've got money to maintain long term and invest in the waterways. I think the thing to make clear for boaters obviously is you do pay a license fee, and that is for something very specific, for having a boat on the water. And that's a requirement, not just to the legislation, but it also helps contribute to the maintenance for navigation. But it is only part of that. So of course, the other contributions for every pound we get from any income from boating, so including mooring fees, we still have to find £4 from elsewhere to contribute to that. So yes, we will look at other ways to bring that money in, but we're also mindful that the waterways are a great resource, that we want people to be able to access the towpaths, to visit them, to use them, and that's for boaters and for other people. So we will look at other income. We continue doing that, but it's not just boaters that are contributing, other people contributing different ways as well.
Okay, thank you. Simon's come back about his question, saying he was asking about bookings at Brentford for a transit between Brentford and Limehouse.
Sorry, misunderstood the question. So I will take that away and look into that for him.
Thank you very much. Now, on a totally different subject, Giles asks, who are district enforcement? Are the trust not enforcing the 1965 to 76 General Canal bylaws?
Yes, so District Enforcement is a private company that people might be familiar. They often manage parking schemes in many places. So the trust has brought in some staff from District Enforcement to work alongside our own staff. But the work they're doing is not enforcement work. It is additional sightings and providing information booklets. They've been inducted and given information to give to boaters, but they're not doing any of the enforcement work that's been quoted under the Act. That's still being carried out by our licensed support teams, our staff. So it just brings a bit of extra capacity and more feet on the towpath.
Okay, thank you. Other thing about rights comes from Martin from the Canal Museum. I understand that you don't have a legal right to apply a quota system for London. You can apply charges. Rationing has to happen either by quota or price. So why can't you charge a lot more for boats to access the London canals if they do not have a home mooring in London? Perhaps with a discount for genuine touring boats that have a home mooring a long way off. It was a long question, but I thought it's best to read the whole thing out rather than—
It's a long question. Yes. So it's a very good point. Yes, as I mentioned, people said, putting a limit on the number of boats in certain areas is something we should look at. And we have investigated this in detail and gone into a lot of work to consider options that, could we do this? The key issue is that, as I mentioned, we have rivers and canals in London, and certain rules apply on some and not others, and particularly rivers with public right of navigation, that if you did apply something like a congestion zone, then there is a risk that you just push the problem elsewhere. And what we don't want to do is to do that. By solving one problem in one area, we create another problem elsewhere. So we're not at this stage looking to apply something like that, but we are looking to try and do a smaller number of measures which do address the issues of allowing people to visit London, be certain of finding a mooring space, and just better management of those available mooring spaces. But we aren't progressing a sort of charging element at this stage.
And another question from Giles. Is there a concern that additional mooring rings and mooring sites will create an induced demand? Interesting question.
There's a risk of that, of course, but it is also important to recognise that if there is space which is suitable for mooring, then it can help alleviate the pressure on other areas. So, as we've just said, we can't limit the numbers. I don't think, whether you created those additional moorings or not, you will manage demand in that way. But I think what it will do is help prevent people mooring where they shouldn't, because it gives a little bit of extra space, and also stops people doing things like damaging the towpath by putting pins into concrete or places attaching themselves to structures. So it's not going to be the solution. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on increasing demand, but I think what it might do is just help free up a little bit more space and pressure in some areas.
Okay, thank you. And we now have a question from Jamie. To spread boaters out more, could a lot more dredging be carried out? As there are so many areas that could be moored along the towpath in and around London, but are too shallow and the canal too narrow to be on longer mooring lines.
So yes, dredging could be carried out, but it is very expensive. So we spend millions of pounds on dredging every year. We dredged about 50 kilometres roughly of canals and waterways last year, and it doesn't sound an awful lot, but what we're focusing on is the navigation. You know, we have a right to maintain the navigation. Where we can, they will do additional areas adjacent to free up mooring space, and we certainly are committed as part of the water safety zone discussions we've been having to review some areas on the Lee. So yes, we do that. We have a rolling programme where we will survey all of our waterways every 7 years at least, to check whether they meet the standards for dredging. But it is a case of course, we'd love to do more, but if we spend more on dredging with a finite pot, that's less on delivering customer service facilities or repairing locks. So it is a difficult balance. I hear this a lot. I appreciate more vegetation management, more dredging if we can, but we're trying to make it go as far as we can.
Thank you. Question again about the mooring rings. There are a couple of long stretches from Ron. There are a couple of long stretches with no boats, and this allows boats to cruise and allow walkers to see the water. Will stretches be left without moorings to allow this?
Yes, so it's very much about a balance. Where we're putting in stretches of rings, we're also looking at whether they won't just be continuous. There will be some gaps, both for people to get access to the water to see it, and also for vegetation, wildlife habitats as well. So we're not looking at extensive long stretches. They're relatively modest, and there will be breaks between them as well. But there will still be areas where, you know, it's not suited for mooring. We want to keep that balance of the waterways being open. People get to the edge, feed the ducks, just enjoy them.
Right. We also have a question in relation to towpath safety from the Bryces. There have been anecdotal reports of boaters and towpath walkers' pets being maimed or killed due to speeding push bikes, motorbikes, mopeds along the Regent's Canal, push bikes particularly, and Walthamstow marshes, both push bikes and motorbikes. Would CNRT be willing to be part of a working group with boaters and pet owners to problem solve this?
Shall I take that one, Matthew? I think absolutely it's a sort of collective issue, and more than happy to sort of join any group that considers these issues. Obviously, we've got our own campaign that we trying to increasingly push, be kind, slow down, about sharing the towpath. Sadly, you know, with COVID, we weren't able to do as much activity out on the towpath with our towpath rangers as we would have liked, but hopefully as those restrictions lift, we'll be out on the towpath again, sort of with those campaigns. You'll see our volunteers about working with people, but more than happy to work with others to come up with solutions and try and you know, make the towpath a great place for everyone to be.
Thank you.
Can I just add though, I mean, I don't think we have had lots of reports of that incident. It sounds horrible if it's happened, but if it does, I mean, like with anything, we would encourage people to report things and let us know, because if we get things reported, we can see if there is an issue, things happening, we can take action and work with people.
Thank you. I've got a feeling some people are sending things into the chat. Could you please send your questions into the Q&A if you want them answered? Chat we will pass on anyway to Ros and Matthew, but if you want them answered, please put them in the Q&A. We have another question here. How is the cost of implementing and enforcing the water safety zones going to be recuperated, given the additional costs of these measures?
So, well, Ros might answer that. I'm going to say we have a duty to manage the waterways. You know, it's not about recuperating that money. It's our responsibility as a navigation authority. So, where we have to do that, we'll have to put additional resources in to address those concerns.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add, Matthew. It's about managing our resources. Obviously, it was causing concerns for people, and so it's working through the issue to try long-term sustainable solutions for everybody involved.
Okay, thank you. This is an anonymous attendee. Given that the limitations of the governing acts and those affecting river navigations limits your abilities to charge and fine, etc., what active consideration has been or is being given to seeking a new statutory basis that can provide you with a framework and structure suitable for the 21st century?
So we're not looking to do that at the moment. I mean, ultimately, it is a government's decision whether to take forward or change legislation. So that process can take many years, and it's not within the control of the trust. So we are working within the powers we have. They're not perfect, but there's nothing to guarantee that any future changes would be any better. But, you know, that is something that is actively for the government to consider if they wanted to do that. But we are working within the powers we have at this stage.
Okay. Are you planning, this is from Roger, are you planning any CNRT and Southeast forums? I can't remember if there have been any this year, especially for the Oxford area.
Yes, so we have had a couple, but our boater surgeries, as I mentioned in the brief outline, sort of will be our new initiative for 2022 when we are able to get out. We found, you know, those more local forums where boaters in specific areas, or you know, any user of our waterways can come and speak to our local team. So actually, I think the first trial area, sort of in the new spring, will be in Oxford. So we will be publishing those on the website.
And are those in person, or are they?
Yeah. Fingers crossed they'll be in person. Yes.
Right. Have you been doing any Zoom forums for people to discuss issues over the last few months?
Yes, we've had a couple, and now we've obviously also got the Lee Navigation group as well, which is particularly looking at the water safety zone issue. So that is meeting monthly at the moment.
Oh, well, that's very convenient you mentioned them again, because the next question, another one from Roger, is the new no mooring signs on the Lee. Did you liaise with the Lee new group in sharing information as to why it has been decided or proposed to have no mooring in these specific sites?
Yes, we have. We've shared and had a separate meeting on that subject and talked about through the areas where we've designated as no mooring, given the explanations for that, and discussed those with that forum. Yes.
Okay. There's another one about the by way of, from Randy Banks, by way of building your refunding case, have you totted up and included the economic contributions made by boaters and boating?
Yes, that definitely is. It's included in the measures, definitely. Yes, we've both in terms of private boaters and the business boaters and the contribution the waterways make to the wider economy as a kind of destination and all those canal side businesses. So yes, all of that is within the mix as well.
Right, there's lots more things appearing. And I'm just going to take some as I get to them, I think. There's another one from Roger. Is there a timetable to construct a replacement pedestrian bridge on the Slough Arm to replace the one that had to be demolished? This is the route of a formal footpath with no practicable alternative route.
I don't have the specifics on that, Roger, but by all means send them through and we'll follow up after the call.
Roger, if you could do that, that'd be great. Hugh is asking, can CNRT push for eco moorings as a planning condition for large canal side developments, such as the huge one at Kensal Green, Sainsbury's stroke gasworks site?
So yes, at different levels we've been doing this. So over the last few years, as the different boroughs have been renewing their planning policies and local plans, we've very much been making the case for how they can future-proof the waterways. So electric charging is very much in at that strategic level, and then when we get down to a specific planning level, then our planning colleagues do work and put forward and discuss with developers things that would enhance, and electric charging is very much in the mix of those, because it's easier to put that in early and when the work's happening than to retrofit it. And it's partly about, you know, addressing that issue we talked about, you know, reducing dependence on generators and engines, which can often cause conflict between canal side users and boaters. So yes, it's the short answer.
And we've had some sort of smaller sort of scale success. For instance, a developer up in Banbury has approached us about sort of working with us about sort of eco moorings as well. So it is becoming more popular and more on the minds of developers. And where we can have those conversations, we will continue to do so.
Thank you. We have a specific question about Tottenham Lock. Are there any Oops, it's just moved. Sorry.
I may be reading ahead, but I'm not sure whether this is about a lock landing, possibly.
It is about a lock landing.
Yes, I thought it might be. So this has been something we identified actually as part of the mooring strategy, the need to install that, and we are at a stage of looking at options to put forward a proposal to have a lock landing there above the lock, because I'm aware that with the new development and some railings that have gone out, it's also made it less easy for boaters there. So we are actively looking at, and hopefully we'll have some options in the next.
Oh, we lost you.
Oh, did you? How far did I get?
Oh, just the last part of your last sentence.
So sorry, in short, yes, we're looking at that. It was part of the London mooring strategy that as was identified as a need.
Oh, we've definitely lost Matthew now, unfortunately. But yes, just to pick up Matthew's answer, we are looking at it, and we've, as Matthew said, we've got some proposals that we will be working with.
Thank you.
Looks rather dramatic, doesn't it? Matthew's well and truly disappeared.
I expect he'll reappear in a minute. Michelle says that no mooring has been discussed. Presumably this is to do with this Lee group, but not agreed. She emphasises it's not been agreed.
So obviously there's been a range of topics that the facilitator has been working through, of which no moorings signs in the red zones were some, and also we've got on just on last week's agenda we were talking about dredging and offside vegetation. Obviously in future agendas there will also be education and information, so an ongoing programme of discussions around a range of things.
Right, okay. Thank you. Again, Michelle, dredging was supported specifically in regards to safety by rowers, boaters, commercial boats and other vendors. It seems multiple consultations are more costly than proactively actually doing the right thing, making the improvements on the navigation and services for boaters, as noted in the 2018 mooring strategy, as well as beyond. How can that be more costly than doing the right thing?
Well, again, as Michelle, we discussed last week, the action taken away was that all those people on the forum would put their points about where dredging in particular would be aspired to along the River Lee in particular, and our dredging manager will look at those and respond back and come in February and tell you what action we're able to take.
I hope I'm back with you. I'm sorry about that. Don't know what happened.
You've just avoided conversations about dredging and other such matters. Some boats do not have the facility to use electric charging. So can you confirm that those boats, often owned and lived on full-time by poorer boaters, will still be able to moor on electric moorings on new developments such as Kensals and Sainsbury's?
So there's no requirement to use those charging points. It's not compulsory. They're obviously there to use if people can, and we want to encourage people, if they can, to use them. We are mindful, and people probably be aware that there are changes coming into clean air legislation, which is likely to impact boaters. We haven't got the full details yet. So we're trying to kind of offer an alternative for boaters, but as I say, it's not compulsory at the moment to use those. We are not requiring that.
Right, so they can be used by whether you're using the electric points or not.
Yeah.
It's about giving people other options, I think, as well. Particularly, more people are asking us for alternative power, so it's a range of options and increasing that across the waterways.
We have another question from Giles. It's not easy for members of the public to report issues. I think I've heard a lot of people actually commenting on this. The 030 etc. phone menu is particularly awful for even experienced users. Giving an email or phone number for London SE customer services on local signs would be helpful.
So the reason we use one number is to try and make sure we can track and record all those calls. There is an automatic voice recognition part of that number, so you can choose to go through to the regional team. But the reason we use that one number is if there isn't anyone there in that regional team, you're more likely to be able to speak to somebody in our call centre. People can also, use a web form. We are looking to update that and make it easier to send things like photos if people want to, or if people have social media, they can also report things through our social media, particularly through Twitter, and that is monitored by a customer service team. So there are different ways. I'm sorry that you find it difficult, but as I say, we're trying to make sure that things don't get lost by going through that one contact point. We can get them to the right people and hopefully get an answer and a resolution to whatever the issue is.
I think I must admit I rather back up Giles's comment, because I've heard a lot of people say that this has been a problem for them, is it possible that there could be a local number that, if there's no one there, can divert to the other number or something?
I think the issue is that it's easier to communicate one number, so it does the reverse really. It will go to the local team if you want to, if there's someone's available, but otherwise it will get recorded centrally by the central customer service team. But if Giles wants to get in touch with his particular experience, I'm happy to look into hear what that was and see if there's things we can improve.
Yeah, so just to back up sort of Matthew's comment, the one central number is a 24 hours sort of when we've not got the local teams. My team is a local team. We sort of do triage the messages every day, but there is that emergency responsibility with that main number, and as Matthew say, it is easier to communicate that just one number, but it does revert then to the local team to support with sort of individual issues.
Okay. Everybody on this call has got my email number, my email address, and I think my phone number, but probably email address is better. So if there's anything that we will be actually putting together the questions that have come up, but if there's things that you want to ask subsequently, please send me an email and I'll make sure it gets to Ros and Matthew. Social media was just mentioned, and Roger again says, given the importance of social media to communicate with customers, are there any proposals to revive the CNRT and SE Southeast, that is presumably Twitter account?
So in answer, Roger, yes, there are plans. We've just been very mindful that we haven't had the internal resources to manage. Our priority this last year has been able to restructure and reorganise the customer inquiries team so that actually they're responding to the email and the online queries first. Now that we've been able to get that onto an even keel where we're confident in the service that we're giving to people, we'll be able to look at the Twitter account and the social media accounts in the new year.
Okay, well, I think as it's now 10 to, oh, there's one more one that's just arrived. I'll just take that one from Mike, who's on the Lee and Stort. Given Matthew's assertion that new online moorings are generally not supported, inverted commas, then could you explain the decision to license the 500 metre stretch of naturalised offside bank, including installation of piling and pontoons between Hardmead Lock and Humbling Bay, near where for permanent mooring?
So I don't know that specific site myself in detail, so it would be unwise to give you a specific answer, but it may be that it's a privately owned piece of land where people can apply for mooring against their land or run a mooring scheme there. But as I say, our policy is not generally to support it, but it doesn't mean there aren't some situations where it may be suitable. And the way we look at those now is to look at a number of different issues, whether it's impact on navigation, on heritage, on environmental grounds, and to review it against all of those things. So generally we don't support them, but it might be there are certain situations where it doesn't have an adverse impact and it may be appropriate. But as I say, I don't know the scheme specifically, but if you want to drop an email to Libby and I can look into that in more detail for you.
He's added, no, it's owned by CNRT.
Okay, well, as I say, I'd have to look into it in detail because it isn't a scheme I'm aware of. Sorry.
Okay. Well, as it's 10 to 9 or just after, I think we ought to bring this to a close. We will, of course, see all the questions that have come through, and this is being recorded, and so it will be available at a later date as well. I'd really like to thank Ros and Matthew for giving up their time this evening and for fielding all those questions, which I hope you feel all of you have had, been covered and been answered. But as I say, if you have any additional things to bring up, please send them through. Nothing's worse than feeling, I haven't got the answers I wanted to get out of this. But Ros and Matthew, thank you so much for giving up your time this evening and putting that together. It's been a really interesting and useful evening, as I'm sure, and so 1 or 2 comments are coming through to that effect. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you all for coming. And I look forward to seeing you in January. And meanwhile, have a wonderful Advent and Christmas and New Year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.